We've heard a good deal about closing the achievement gap by meeting the need for early education, but there's also a need for quality, and that depends on closing a gap in educational leadership. That's the topic of a book by our guest called Leading for Change in Early Care and Education, Cultivating Leadership from Within. She's also a professor and executive director of the Institute for Early Education Leadership and Innovation at UMass Boston. We'd like to welcome Ann Douglas. Thank you very much for being with us, Ann.
Thank you.
You are also a former early educator, but first of all, talk about who are the people you're really writing about in this book?
So I'm writing about people who work in the birth to 5 early care and education sector, and what that means is people who are providing childcare, either family childcare providers, teachers in preschools, community-based childcare centers, Head Start and early Head Start programs. So those are the people I'm writing about.
And of course, what's also interesting is that you are now in an academic setting, but you're talking about people, first of all, we're talking about maybe a racial gap almost here in the population, because if you look at the children being served and a lot of the people who are their teachers in those classrooms and home settings, those are two different worlds.
In the early care and education sector, first of all, the people who work in this sector that I've just described it's the largest sector of the education workforce, so people who work with children birth to 5. It's the most racially and linguistically diverse sector of the education workforce. So we have an incredible asset in our birth to 5 workforce in that it actually better reflects the children and families served than any other part of the education spectrum.
It would seem in an ideal world, this is a workforce that you would be tapping for some new ideas or some insights, especially about the cultures of the children and the families. Is that going on as well as it should be, you think?
I wrote this book because it's not. Imagine in the healthcare sector, if we were trying to improve the healthcare sector, if we didn't include doctors. That's exactly what we're doing in the childcare sector. We have a lot of room to grow and to make improvement, but we have not tapped that expertise. We haven't looked within the workforce and tried to cultivate leadership there. And yet the people who do this work every single day with children and families, they know what it takes and they know what they need and they have insights about the solutions. And we can't achieve the kind of quality we're looking for if we don't respect and include those insights when it comes to making improvement.
We're talking with Ann Douglas from UMass Boston here on BNN News. What does leadership mean exactly?
I teach the leadership coursework in our program, and I ask the teachers who come into our program what comes to their mind when they hear the words leader and leadership. And what they consistently do is they describe leadership as a formal job title, something with authority. Leadership is about being decisive. It's a distinctly male notion of leadership, a very traditional notion of leadership. And for that reason, in the early ed workforce, we often don't identify as leaders. So what we do is we help to cultivate new mindsets about leadership that really can elevate our field and its capacity to have leadership. So we think about leadership as highly relational, leadership as something that's about influencing positive change. So you don't have to have a job title to be a leader. You don't have a job title to try to fix the problems we face and come up with solutions.
What about the workforce and the climate in which they're working? Because you might have a teacher who has some insights and maybe he or she is thinking, this ought to be done differently and I got to talk to somebody, but I don't want to rock the boat. I mean, how do you change that?
That's part, I think, of the leadership mindset is how do you either collectively, by engaging with other people who maybe share your concern and passion about fixing something, or how do you build networks? We don't have a lot of leadership networks, much like women's leadership more broadly. In this sector, there aren't a lot of networks for how leaders can find other people who share their interests.
What about other settings? I mean, either things going on right now, or maybe in your own career looking back, did you see any examples of somebody doing this the right way and you just like to see more of it?
What I saw, and I think what really drives this work, is I worked for almost 20 years in the childcare sector. I was a teacher, I was a director, I was a family childcare provider, and a quality improvement consultant. And what I saw was leadership. I saw the leadership in this field. I saw early educator teachers and directors who were coming up with innovative ways to better respond to the needs of the children and families they served. But what I saw is that no one else in the world seemed to know that that was happening. It was our best kept secret. And so I'm trying to make it not be a secret anymore and to really create pathways for educators to be leaders.
Well, another non-secret is that this field doesn't pay all that well, and you might have some people who are in it for a while. They develop as leaderships, and then they reach that point where they just can't stay there anymore. What about that?
What we have found is that leadership development is actually a retention strategy. It's one way that we can retain talent in our field, which we desperately need. So right now, one thing we hear from the educators who come to our program is that they were on the verge of leaving the field. They came to this field not for the high salaries, although they need to get better salaries. They came to this field because they're passionate and they want to make a difference with children and families, but they got discouraged. There's almost nothing there to support the development of experienced professionals in this field. So they came to this program, and almost every single one of those people stayed in this field. So we retained that talent, and now they're out there making a difference.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Ann Douglas from UMass Boston. And one other consideration here is that if you change the formula for leadership, even the rules about leadership, you still have to contend with these norms about evaluating the effectiveness of an early education or care program. How do you reconcile those two?
Well, one thing about new norms for leadership is that it's not just in early education that this kind of relational and collaborative leadership for change matters. This is a kind of leadership that's now being recognized across many sectors as the kind of leadership we need now in this world broadly. So it works in health, it works in the military. The military has a relational and collaborative leadership model that's part of their leadership training manual. So this is a kind of leadership that drives performance and that is associated with highly resilient and high-performing organizations. So I believe this kind of leadership will take us to the kinds of quality outcomes that we're trying to measure right now.
It would be nice to think this would make the whole field look better to people as a career path to choose. But what about your choice of this path, looking back? Were you looking for something like this at the outset?
When I entered this field after college, I entered it because I wanted to make a difference and because I had always loved young children. That's what a lot of young people say to me when they come to our academic programs, is that that's why they're pursuing this career. Sometimes people dismiss that. I don't dismiss that. I think that's the passion that drives people in our field, and it's what's kept me in this field all along.
Thank you very much for being with us. Ann Douglas, and we should also mention that if people want to find out this book and how to get it, what's the best website for looking that up?
Well, you could Google, at UMass Boston, you can Google the Institute for Early Education Leadership and Innovation.
Great. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Ann Douglas from UMass Boston.